You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, who is a current Marine still serving on active duty with an amazing foundation that can benefit veterans and current service members. More on that coming up in a moment. But of course, some homework for you guys to do. That is to remind you, Apple Podcast reviews. We're about halfway to 1,000, so keep them coming. It is so easy, guys, to leave a review. You can do it right from your smartphone. It doesn't have to be a long one. And you can just even leave us 5 stars and move on. We certainly need all those to keep this podcast growing and keep it continuing to grow this Hazard Ground community. So again, Apple Podcast reviews, very, very simple and very easy. Also, we just made another donation from what we've earned through our partnership with Amazon. You've heard me tell you about it every single week. You know, the one where you go to our website, hazardground.com, click on that Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab, do all your normal Amazon shopping. We get a percentage of what you spend. And then we donate a percentage of that back to some of the charities. Well, we have donated to Guitars for Vets. If you remember a few episodes back with Nick Rucker, he is a veteran, a country musician, and ambassador for Guitars for Veterans, which provides veterans struggling with physical injuries, PTSD, and other emotional distress a unique therapeutic alternative. Guitars for Vets pursues its mission to share the healing power of music by providing free guitar instruction, a new acoustic guitar, and a guitar accessory kit in a structured program run by volunteers primarily through the Department of Veterans Affairs facilities and community-based medical centers. So we are very happy and so glad we could contribute to their mission, even in just a small way, because it's you, the listeners, who are supporting our Amazon campaign that has certainly allowed us to make that donation. So thank you very much. And we are glad to support Guitars for Veterans. Also a reminder, all of our video episodes that you're watching right now, and you may just be listening to the audio version, but if you don't know about our video program, of course, you can get it on our YouTube channel and Kill Cliff's YouTube channel and the Kill Cliff app. But also now all of our video episodes are available on our website, hazardground.com. So you can go there as well. Remember, keep up with everything that we have going on with the website, hazardground.com. But now also you can get all the video episodes there as well. Now let's get to this week's guest, who is a current active duty major in the Marine Corps. He has 2 deployments to Afghanistan and another one to Australia. He has a Bronze Star with Valor and a Purple Heart, and he is also the founder and president of Patrol Base Abbate, which is a support organization that offers free of cost retreats in Big Sky Country, and it is named after Sergeant Matthew Abbate, who was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions when he was killed in action in Afghanistan. He is Thomas Schueman joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Tom, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, man, thanks for having me.
All right, great for you to be with us. I have never been to Big Sky Country, so I'm excited to find out how I can get a free trip. Just kidding. That said, an amazing organization. And, you know, I spent some time reading Sergeant Abbate's citation for his Navy Cross. Yep. Just incredible heroism and the things he did to keep his fellow Marines alive were certainly noteworthy and God, just sounds like an amazing soldier. So we will hear more about Patrol Base Abbate coming up. But start back at the beginning for you and how and why you ended up in the Marine Corps.
Sure. My story, I think, is pretty boring, but you're the host. So 9/11 happened, and I was in high school, and it's what's incredible is at the Naval Academy is I teach all these midshipmen, and they're like, well, I was 5 years old and I went to the air show and I knew I was going to be a Marine jet pilot. I'm like, I was 5 years old, picking my boogers, watching Teenage Ninja Turtles, and didn't have anything in my life figured out. And so somehow all these people that I, teach all had their life figured out well before me. I don't have family history in the military, never. Up until that day, I had no aspirations or idea that I would join the military. That day happened, and I said, "Oh, I got to do something about that." Knowing nothing about the military, being as boot as you could possibly be, I didn't know how that would shape up. I went to Loyola alums here on the call all around, and they had an ROTC program. I didn't even apply on time. I didn't get the scholarship, but I just showed up and I said, hey, you guys do something about the military. I think that's what I'm trying to do. And they said, yep, go to this little fake boot camp week up in Great Lakes Naval Base, running around. And by the end of that week, I said, well, I've been hanging out with the Navy guys and there's a couple Marine guys. And I think the Marines probably is a better fit for me. And so and then there's a civic duty aspect in that my mom had me when she was 19, became a Chicago cop, worked her ass off and provided me opportunities that she never had for herself. And then we went from being very, very poor, food stamps, living in cockroach infested apartments on the south side of Chicago to I was able to go get a halfway decent education at some point, something that she could have never dreamed of for herself. And I said, at 17, 18 years old, this is a pretty special place that you can, that someone can go out and work and create opportunities. And I think, America's like a bank. If everybody takes something out and no one puts something in, it doesn't work that way, right? And so someone's got to put those deposits in, and I felt some civic duty to go put a deposit in.
I got to ask you, who is your favorite Ninja Turtle?
Yeah, it would be Leonardo.
I'm more of a Donatello guy, but that's because he was really good in the video game. But anyway,
sure.
So no background in the Navy or in the Marines. What was it about the Marines that you said that this fits me better? What was the draw?
I think my story is one of where are the higher standards, where's the greatest challenge, I think. And it was just, I was freshman or fourth class, whatever you want to call it, in ROTC. And I looked at the seniors who are Navy and seniors who are Marines. And I said, I think I'm smoking what they're rolling. I'm picking up what they're putting down, and, went that way. And then I got to TBS, still not knowing much about the Marine Corps, and I saw the infantry officers and the non-infantry officers, and I said, I think there's something about them that appeals to me. And then I also saw my peers who said they wanted to go infantry on the first cold night that we had out in the field in Quantico. They said, oh, I don't want to do any of that anymore. And I said, well, if you don't want to do any of that anymore, I do want to do that because you don't want to do it. And that's, same thing. That's how I ended up going to recon. That's why I ended up at Georgetown, for graduate school. It's just where's the next big challenge? Where are those standards? What can get me out of my comfort zone? And I think that is kind of always the appeal for me.
Now, forgive me for not being so familiar with the naval selection between who goes Marines and who doesn't, but was it you decided to go Marines and there was no objection? Did you have to earn your certain way through ROTC to get to be a Marine, or was that automatically just what you chose and they gave to you?
So if you're squared away and not all fucked up like a football bat like I am, I think you apply your senior year and you come in the program as a Marine option. Now you still have to go to officer candidate school and pass officer candidate school to ultimately get that commission. But since I didn't apply until a couple weeks into my freshman year, for 2 years, I submitted to the Marine Board. They said, your GPA sucks, your pull-ups suck, and so I thought I wasn't going to get the scholarship actually. And so I went down to the officer recruiter in downtown Chicago and I said, hey, because if you don't pick it up by your junior year, you don't get it. And it was my sophomore year and I still hadn't picked it up. And so I went and I did this called PLC Juniors. And I went down there for 6 weeks into Quantico, and on graduation day, my assistant Marine officer instructor who was at Loyola Northwestern came up to me because he was down there acting as a sergeant instructor and said, hey, just so you know, you got the scholarship. I knew you had the scholarship, but I also thought you could use some extra training. So I let you ride it out here for the last 6 weeks. And you didn't have to do this because now you have to go again next summer anyways with ROTC. And I'm like, great. Well, good. I could use remediation, so it's fine.
So you graduate and you head off to OCS for the Marine Corps. Did you know exactly how hard that was going to be, or was it not that hard for you?
ROTC or ROCS?
Your OCS. I mean, I was in ROTC. I know how hard it's not. I mean, it's ROTC is ROTC.
Yeah. Yes.
But I mean, OCS seems to be a little bit more difficult than ROTC was.
Yeah. So, yep. Just a couple early, the hardest part about ROTC is just being hungover, going and drilling, so I think that was always the hardest part for me with ROTC. With OCS, when I went in 06, it was pretty hard. I think it had a 50% attrition rate. I am not inherently a squared away guy, and so I always need a little extra training to be squared away. And so I think there was a 50% attrition rate in the summer of 06. When I came back in the summer of 07, we were doing the surge, and there was a new CO down there at OCS, and I did notice it was a little kinder and friendlier officer candidate school. I think we needed to meet some of those numbers. And I mean, OCS, you run fast, yell loud, run fast, yell loud. And if you could run fast, yell loud, you'd probably be okay.
So when you graduate from OCS and you're done with ROTC, what year or month is it?
I did 2 summer packages. So I mean, my last thing through OCS, it was July 07. And then, but I still had to do my senior year before I commissioned in May of 2008. And probably that senior year was significantly harder than OCS because I, dropped so many courses throughout my first 3 years that I had to take 21 credit hours my fall and spring semester plus ROTC, and my metabolism slowed down my senior year. And then all of a sudden, and I didn't realize that I was getting fat until my gunny started to give me some good morning incentive training. So between my gunny giving me some inspections a couple times a week and then PT me and 21. So that was actually that last year, my senior year was pretty tough, but that was all my own doing. So yeah, commission May 2008.
All right. So where do you go next? What happens next? Because you don't end up in deployment until late 2010. So where do you go first?
The basic school, where every Marine officer starts. And I think it's great, foundational, it's basic, and it provides every officer in the Marine Corps a baseline on leadership and a basic understanding of the responsibilities of a rifle platoon commander. So, our lawyers are there, our pilots are there. And so I think there's value. I didn't love it, but to me, it was really a stepping stone to what I wanted to get to, because at some point I did start to really want to be an infantryman. In probably a month or 2 into my time down there, that I was very, every time I met with the captain who was in charge of our platoon, he'd say, what do you want to do? Infantry. And so to me, it was just a stepping stone to get to kind of where I wanted to get to, which was IOC. And so immediately following the basic school, officers will then go to their MOS schools, to whatever respective community they're in. So I just went right across the street there in Quantico over to the infantry officers course. And so there's a series of me kind of like just stumbling through things, kind of just 9/11 happens. And then I show up to this ROTC unit. And then when I was out running wild in the woods out there at IOC, at some point I said, yes. I didn't know for many years. I've just kind of little like a bumblebee, just bumbling around, hitting, but now I am in fact right where I should be doing exactly what I should be doing. And I guess it was still an assumption, because that assumption I don't think is confirmed until you're under fire. But I think at some point shoot machine guns and rockets and ground fighting and running wild through the Quantico woods, I said, yes, I think this is what my calling is, actually.
Right. So then you end up going to 3-5 Marines, which is a historic, very notable Marine unit in Camp Pendleton. We've interviewed several people on the show who were part of that unit over the course of the entire war on terror. But did you realize when you went there the level of unit you were going to?
Yeah, 3-5 get some right. I read as I was driving across the country from Virginia to Camp Pendleton, I was reading With the Old Breed by E.B. Sledge. And I can't tell you how motivated and excited I was to be reading about Kilo 35 on Peleliu and Okinawa, and to be joining Kilo 35, and that's where I ended up. And I'm reading, and I'm reading the final pages of With the Old Breed while I'm sitting in the Kilo 35 office, and right outside the office there's a picture of Sledge and all those guys out on Peleliu, and our call sign was Sledgehammer, based on EB Sledge. And what an incredible legacy to inherit and to uphold. And so I Sledgehammer 1 actual, first platoon commander, and my platoon sergeant, after I fired 2 of them, would end up, he was a Phantom Fury 3-5 vet. So he had been shot during in 04 with 3-5 during Phantom Fury. My squad leader was a Fallujah vet. He went to the 07-08 deployment with 3-5. So I had a lot of respect and appreciation for our unit's history. And I think if one thing we can definitely give the Marine Corps credit to is we know our history and we know our legacy and our stories, and we do a good job of capturing that in everything we do. And so, I had an appreciation for the unit that I was reporting into.
When you got there, did you know how quickly you would be deploying?
When we got there, we were headed to a MU, so the Marine Expeditionary Unit out there in Okinawa. It was a crappy time. The Marines that I inherited in first platoon had just gotten back from a MU to Okinawa, and they were the first iteration of 3-5 to miss the war in several years. And so all their seniors and were all combat vets, and they all joined to go to Iraq, and they were the crew who missed the war, and so they were a little bit jaded and cynical, and then I come in and I'm full of piss and vinegar, and I'm like, "Come on, boys, we're gonna prepare for combat and let's get after it." And they're like, "No, we're going to Okinawa and we know this song and dance." And people were pretty belligerent and morale was pretty low, and it was tough. Our Christmas safety brief, the battalion commander, now General Morris, said, "Hey, we're going to Afghanistan." And just like that, pivoted. And I said, "Okay, you don't want to get in line, you don't want to act right, you stay on the bench. So I'm only bringing the varsity team. And so you either get your shit together or get out." And from that moment forward, the remainder of my workup, easy day, no problems. Yeah.
When do you get to Afghanistan?
Late September 2010.
Did you know what your mission was going to be?
So one unit in 5th Marines had been to Afghanistan, and that was 1-5. And they had a very Cohen centric deployment. They came back and it was, kissing babies and KLEs and that kind of stuff in hearts and minds. And so that was that was kind of what was on my mind. I read 3 cups of tea on my way over, trying to learn the Pashtun Wali code. And but right before we left, the battle space commander for the AO that we were going to, the area of operations that we were going to, which was, we were going to rip out Kilo 37, Kilo 35 was going to rip out Kilo 37. And Kilo 37 at the time, it was Captain Cohen, now Lieutenant Colonel Cohen. He's the battalion commander in 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines. He had been medevaced. And so his company was still deployed. And he comes to talk to us up there in San Mateo and Camp Pendleton. And the reports that he gave to us were, it was not, Singin district was not, the Northern Green Zone was not kissing babies. And you got this, Cohen is the most intense guy. There's a great op order that he delivers, if you look it up on YouTube, before his company pushes into Singin. And he's like, the tactical task is to breathe fire. You're going to kill the enemy. It's like the most incredible savage op order you've ever heard. And so this guy is like very naturally a meat-eating savage. And so, and then, he's just been medevac from getting blown up so many times. And he comes back and he starts talking to us and it's like, oh, shit. And so I think that was kind of the first real indications that we were about to go get after it. I think I'd still been so indoctrinated into coin that I still thought I was going to be winning hearts and minds and shaking hands with the mullah. But I think pretty quickly I came to understand that was not the case.
And for those civilians listening, COIN is just short for counterinsurgency. As far as the type of operations that are being conducted. So when you get there and you're on ground, what's the operational tempo like from a day-to-day basis?
I got there and within 24 hours, I led a 96-man patrol out to secure 3 battalion NAIs, named areas of interest, without having done any type of RIP, left seat, right seat. It was just, hey, we're going to send 4 or say again.
Is that overwhelming?
I will tell you, IOC does a great job. I had great squad leaders and we had a really aggressive workup. I was stressed out planning this operation to take 96 dudes outside the wire. It was my first time in combat, and we move in Ranger file, so it's this long snake, and I did not have half of my platoon outside of the entry control point of the patrol base, and we were in a complex ambush. IAD initiated, multiple firing positions.
Hey, welcome to
yes. And again, half my platoon still inside the patrol base, and I'm trying to get up to the front where they've got the IED. And as I go to run through an open danger area, enemy PKM medium machine gun opens fire down a PDF between these 2 cornfields. I dive behind a pile of giant opium. The poppy actually is, the poppy's all stacked up. And so I'm concealed, but I'm not covered. And also the guy knows that this is where I just dove behind. And so he's just raking this pile and all this poppy is popping over my head. And I had the platoon commander from the previous unit with me. And I had my machine gun squad leader who had a M203 on his rifle. And I said, Nykirk, I'm going to pop up, start suppressing. I need you just to throw some HE into that window. Got it? Good. I'm suppressing. And so I stood up. Bang, 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 bang. He stands up, shoots a couple pretty mic rounds. We get into the next field. And that platoon commander turns to me and goes, okay, Lieutenant Schueman, now that you got your car, how about you make a decision? I'm like, my decision was to not fucking die right there. Like, do you think I was concerned about getting my combat action ribbon when I am 5 minutes into my first patrol, getting mowed down, I'm pretty sure the car was going to come. That was not motivated to get a ribbon. I can assure you that. So yeah, it was at some point the compound that we wanted to set up, because it was going to be a 3-day operation. The compound that we wanted to set up in, that's where the whole village was staying allegedly, and they're like, you can't stay here, and you can't. And so like, okay, well, where should we? They said, oh, go stay in this house over here. So we go into this different compound. It's abandoned. We're walking around, and a grenade comes over the wall, and I look and I see a grenade, and I'm like, you do the drill. It's frag out, but then it's grenade. When the grenade comes, enemy grenade, and I'm like, grenade, and diving out of and I'm thinking, I got 96 people out here. How did somebody get so close? And I said, I do not have good battle tracking right now. There's clearly gaps in my lines. I mean, it was 10 minutes before that, we had gone firm in this cornfield, and I'm trying to figure out where the hell we're going to go, since they're saying that we can't stay in this compound that was our primary compound that we were going to set up in to run our patrol base operations out of. And I hear a couple shots, and my squad leader comes back to me and goes, "Sir, Lance Corporal Teague just shot someone." I'm like, okay, did they have a gun? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay, killing is authorized. So like that was wild. And then I hear some mortars landing. I'm like, are we being mortared? Are we firing mortars? We're firing mortars. I get a hold of the mortar section that I had out with me. I said, did you guys just fire some mortars? Like, yeah, we saw some Taliban egressing after the sniper shot at them. I'm like, I'm pretty sure we got to get mortars cleared by somebody before we just start firing mortars. We got rotary wing flying around. Like, you can't just be shooting mortars. You got to talk to somebody. And I mean, yeah, so it was wild. But
I mean, that's
ultimately,
to use a phrase, that's popping your cherry in a way that is unique, to say the least.
It was yeah, absolutely. And the other, our sister platoon, I was first and second platoon. What we were doing is we were trying to do this diversionary tactic to draw the Taliban down south towards us to allow recon to insert to the north. Recon was jumping in to Sangin. And so I went out one way, the patrol base, and then second platoon went out the other direction. And second platoon, same thing. They weren't even halfway outside the patrol base, and they had 2 Marines shot, and one of them was a corpsman. And I mean, it was absolutely the Wild West.
Yeah. Was there any moment that you started to wonder, what did I get myself into?
Yeah. We were taking casualties at such a rate that I just thought, there's no way we're not going to make it. But I think the hardest moment for me was my best friend Cam West. So I was first platoon commander, Cam was third platoon commander, and then Will Donnelly was second platoon commander. And we'd all been the TBS together, infantry officers course together. We were all roommates out there in San Clemente, outside of Camp Pendleton. And we had just had a big mass casualty. That's when Abbate got his Navy Cross, and then so 3 or 4 dudes killed there. I think in the first 2 weeks we had 14 killed in action, and already 50, 60 wounded as a battalion. And Cam was this guy who's this larger than life figure, kind of this John Wayne. And I was out on a patrol, and I heard the medevac for 3rd platoon over the radio, and I was in my own firefight at the time, and you can hear, like, we call them the zap numbers or the kill card numbers, right? And I could hear that I was pretty sure it was Cam. And they had one routine casualty KIA, one urgent surgical, looked like it wasn't looking good. And I knew the KIA was definitely his radio operator, Lance Corporal Bell, which platoon commander and the radio operator are always very close and in proximity to one another. And so I got to get through this fight that I'm in, and I came back inside the wire, and Will Donnelly met me at the gate, and he was second platoon commander. Will would end up being killed a month later in the Battle of Thanksgiving, and Will said, Cam's been hit, they don't think he's going to make it. And at that point, it was just too much for me. I had to find an area to be alone, because I didn't want my Marines to see me like that. So the only place I could find on the patrol base was the detention facility where we kept the enemy detainees, and we didn't have any at the moment. And so I went and I closed myself in there, and I had a real moment. I literally was weeping on the ground, and I finally kind of pulled my shit together, and I said, you got to get your shit together. And I went up to my little mud hut, and I had stored away a Snickers bar at the bottom of my pack. And I said, you're going to need this Snickers bar for a rainy day. This is going to be your little morale boost. I did not anticipate that within 2 weeks I would be tapping into that morale reserve, but there I was. And I opened up my pack, and I start to dig through it, and immediately it's apparent that a bunch of rats have been living in my bag, and they've chewed through everything and shit and pissed all over my bag. And by the time I get to the bottom of my bag, all that's left is a chewed up Snickers bar wrapper. And that's what broke the levee. That was too much. I could not. And so I broke down. I was physically ill, like throwing up, chills, fever. But come the next morning, I said, I can't be combat ineffective like this again. I have troops to lead. And I teach literature at the Naval Academy, and one of the novels that I teach is Gates of Fire. And the Spartans had this routine that they would do before, or ritual that they would do before they went into combat, where they broke their bracelets, and they would keep half, and then they put half in a basket. And so that if they were disfigured and you couldn't recognize them, that you could, it's so just similar to what our dog tags are. But really what it was also about is that they left their humanity, and then they had to go do warrior type stuff out there. And after that moment, it was a breaking of my bracelets moment, where my expectations, I now had the proper expectations to thrive in combat, and I was able to compartmentalize anything that came up after that moment. And so it was, there was just I never felt like tactically or technically unprepared, but that was a moment that I said, hey, you've got to change. You've got to be able to compartmentalize this stuff. And then, there's moments like when one of my team leaders gets hit and loses his arm, and one of my Marines hands me his fingers and says, I found McLeod's fingers. And it's like, oh, thank you. But he doesn't have an arm anymore. And so you put these fingers in your cargo pocket. And then there's, I can talk about several moments like that where no amount of training can prepare you for some of these moments, some of these conversations that you'll have to have. But I think when it comes to decide, communicate, act, or suppress, assess, move, kill, I think the cycle of the infantryman type stuff, I think I was always, and that's like I said, it's an assumption. At infantry officer course, I said, I think I'm in the right job. And then when the bullets and the band-aids and the bombs all start coming off, and you can keep your head, and you have this equanimity, and you could be that calm, and you could have that self-composure. You say, oh yes, I think this is probably the right job for me.
Tom, I want to get to those expectations in a moment, but I do want to back up. When you were alone in that detention center, in that cell, and you were on your knees and you were crying, what were some of the emotions and thoughts going through your head in that moment? Was it just pure, devastation at loss, or was it agony? Was it frustration, anger?
I think, yeah, it was probably all those. I think, as you say them, it's like, yep. So I was mourning potentially the loss of a brother. I knew his family very well, and so I'm thinking very much of his family at that moment. I am frustrated that at the time we were getting our asses kicked. So angry, frustrated. When November 9th, the day that I was wounded, the much more significant thing that happened that day was that Robert Kelly was killed that morning. And Robert Kelly, another platoon commander, his dad, General Kelly, you may know. And say that again.
That General Kelly? That was his son?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So Rob and I had gone to infantry officer course together. And again, Rob was in Lima Company. I was in Kilo Company. Rob, while we were both lieutenants, Rob was prior enlisted and had done a deployment to Fallujah with 1-8 as an assaultman. And so he was a mentor of mine. He was older and much wiser and someone who I really looked up to and admired. And my last day in America, I spent hungover on the beach with General Kelly and Rob's family because they had rented out a little cabin there on the beach in Camp Pendleton. And so Rob calls me and says, "Hey, my dad wants you to come join us for this barbecue." And I'm still sleeping at noon that day because it was our last day before we deploy. And but I'm like, well, I'm not, obviously I'm going. The general says come out, I got to come out. And as soon as you get there, what does he do? Hands you a PBR and says, "Hey, Tom." And like you're just like, "Yes, sir," right? So when my company commander came in on November 9th, I think one of my first thoughts is that any minute there's going to be a Keiko officer standing outside his wife, the general, and Mrs. Kelly, his brother John, and sister Kate, and so I think you not only does your heart break because you're losing your friend, but then you those families become your families too, and you know them, and you know that they're about that knock at the door, what's going to happen when that knock comes at the door. And so I think that is very difficult as well to deal with.
With all this loss that you're dealing with as the beginning of this deployment happens, and prior to your injury, are you ever fearful of your own life? I mean, we talk a lot about coming to grips with your own mortality because combat forces you to do that and how people handle that in different ways. Was that ever a thought? If you watch all these other Marines and friends of yours get killed and get wounded, and are you thinking, I'm not making it out of here alive?
Yeah, I was pretty convinced at some point that I thought I would not make it out alive. I also think I am very grateful for that moment. I think that moment that said, "Hey, none of this shit is guaranteed. And if you get this opportunity of this incredible gift called life, what are you going to do with it?" And up until that moment, I had been living like a boy. I was doing things that boys do, and I said, you need to be a man if you get out of here, and you need to, and so it just crystallized my values. It helped me determine what was important. And so it was only through that very close proximity to death that I become that I have my own hero's journey, where I said, I know now that when I come back, what needs to be done if I am afforded this opportunity. And I'm going to live in a way that honors these sacrifices, and I'm going to make their lives count and make it meaningful, make their sacrifice meaningful. And so I think that was a critical component. But I think I call it the luxury, of leadership, is that you don't have a whole lot of time to worry about yourself. And I think two things enabled me to be pretty free on the battlefield. My faith in that, I punch my card. I think I'm probably going somewhere better. It's no big deal. And then it's just, I didn't have time to be worried about myself. I had 25, 30 sons at any given moment out there. And when you're a parent and your kid runs out in the street, you don't think like, oh, well, the car might hit me, right? You just go out, right? You go. And so it's just, I would do all kinds of crazy shit. And when I would be done, I remember a couple times, like Lance Corporal Beaver be like, "Sir, you're fucking crazy." And I'm like, "Beaver, like, we had to get over there." And I was the guy that needed to do it. And it's the idea of never asking your people to do something that you aren't willing to do yourself. It's the fighter leader concept. Although it's cheesy, it does happen in reality, where you're going to be in a bad situation, and guess who everybody's going to little turkey peek at? They're going to look at you, and they're going to say, "All right, this sucks. What are we going to do?" And you got to be like, "You're going to follow me, boys. Are you ready? I'm 6'3" with a big ass head, and I'm going to be the first one up, and I'm going to be running. And guess what? They're going to be, that PKM is just going to follow me, and you're going to run behind me. Everybody ready? Let's go. I'm Oscar Mike." And so, I think, but I also think it's important to not be victims here, because while we took many punches, we overwhelmingly delivered many more. We absolutely stacked Taliban bodies. And when I was leaving the wire, I read, I teach literature, and I read a lot about fear. I don't know if I had, even, I had 19 casualties in my platoon of 35. I still, every time I went outside the wire, thought we had the advantage, right? And I thought, if I'm the Taliban, I'm like, oh fuck, here comes platoon. Like, fuck, like they're like, and I had 35 badass dudes carrying machine guns, rockets, grenades, and in a couple minutes we could have artillery, mortars, close air support. So I think, at no point did I again, in that first week or two, I think I was feeling a little bit victimized, but I quickly found that once we got the lay of the land and got our feet under us, that we were, punching much heavier than they could ever dream of. And the best remedy for any loss that we took was getting a win. And so on November 9th, when I was blown up, my squad leader and my platoon sergeant were also blown up. Yep. And so Sergeant Humphrey is missing one leg below the knee with just two bones sticking out. And then his other leg is from the knee to the top of his boot. It's just a bone. There's no skin, muscle, anything. It's just looks like a bare bone. And then I look to the left of him, and my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Henley, is bleeding out the ears and can't get up. And I'm like, this is a bad fucking day. And I get down, I start treating Humphrey, and Humphrey saying first he wants to confirm, which every amputee I could tell you the first thing they want, that when they're still alive, they want to make sure their junk is all there, and then
and then the next valid, by the way, for those who don't know, that's 100%. Because look, and this is purely man biology, right? Everything else after that is negotiable. I can live without legs. I can live without arms. You take my junk away, and we have to have a whole different set of conversations. And so that's the line of demarcation, if you will.
Yes, 100%. You know, we had several amputees in my platoon, and undoubtedly the first and foremost thought on their mind is that. And once you kind of clear that up, like you're saying, everything else is we can everything else will buff out.
They haven't come up with a prosthetic.
And then, you know, my squad. Yes. Not that I'm aware of.
Maybe they have, but I'm not 100% aware that it exists, nor would I try it. But a different discussion again. So.
Yep. Definitely a rabbit hole. And so he keeps saying, "Sir, I can't believe I stepped off the trail. I stepped off the trail. Our rear of our patrol had come under heavy fire, and we were out there QRFing another patrol that had a casualty as well. Sergeant Michaels had been blown up and would end up losing his leg. And when we all came together, he steps off the trail and he keeps apologizing. I'm like, Humphrey, you could probably don't worry about it, bud. You know, let's just no one's and here's this guy that is apologizing, missing his other leg, and a guy who would almost die several times in flight and then almost die again in Lundstuhl. And what's so remarkable about these Marines that I led and I served and fought alongside is, as we're carrying Humphrey off the battlefield, you know, he keeps saying is, I know I'm heavy. And why don't you guys just put me down and take a break? A guy that they would have to resuscitate on the flight moments before he dies. What are his thoughts with us? His thoughts are with his Marines, saying, "I know and that's, man, what a privilege it is to serve men like that." And so I get back and they say, "Oh, you get on the helicopter with these guys." And I said, "I can't fucking get on the helicopter with these guys." My platoon sergeant and my squad leader both. I mean, you talk about testaments of character. 48 hours later, my platoon sergeant comes waddling off of a helicopter. And I'm like, "What are you doing? Your ears were bleeding out 2 days ago." And he's like, "Yeah, I snuck on the first flight coming back here. And they want to be," he says, "Put me on the patrol manifest, sir. We're going out in a 3-day operation." I'm like, "Staff Sergeant, you can't walk in a straight line right now." And we all walk in straight lines because of the ID threat. You can't come out on patrol. You rest assured, Staff Sergeant was on the first patrol outside the wire. Staff Sergeant, who was in Fallujah with 3-5, like I said, had been shot in Fallujah in 2004 when he was a squad leader. He's going back into the patrol base, gets shot a couple hundred meters outside of the patrol base, turns around and says, "Hey, y'all better stop throwing rocks back there." Goes into the base, and someone comes up and says, "Sergeant, the back of your trousers all red. You've been shot in the ass." Again, they try to medevac him out of country, refuses medevac, back with his platoon a week later after getting shot in the ass. This guy, 2 Purple Hearts, both deployments, both of the most lethal, deadly deployments that the Marine Corps fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. This guy had a one-way ticket out. What does he do? Comes back as soon as he can to get back and lead and fight with his Marines. And so I think, so the next day I led in Operation Humphrey's Revenge, and I said, we're going right to the hornet's nest, and we're going to stir it up, and we are going to fuck these guys up. And so I think that was what was really important for me, is that when you take that loss, when you take a punch, you got to show the men that, hey, the enemy isn't invincible, and that we're down, but we're not out. And the units that I found struggled were the units that would take that punch and then kind of go a little bit, feel sorry for themselves, or go a little bit internal. And it's hard to get that momentum back. But if you say, hey, I got an L, but tomorrow I'm getting a W, and I found that to kind of be the best remedy through those kind of situations.
Yeah, going back to those expectations you talked about before, is that some of it, not only understanding loss and how to deal with it and how to cope with it internally on your own, how to sort of flip that switch, but also, that ability to counterpunch? I mean, were you aware that that was part of the coping mechanism for you guys? Are those the expectations you were referring to?
The expectation is like you're a so we'll stick with the fighting metaphor, and the boxer metaphor is like that you're in the ring, and that you have an expectation to get hit. And if you have an expectation, if you understand that you're in a fight, you're going to get your hands up. And when you have your hands up and that punch comes, it's not to say that Mike Tyson throws a punch at you and you got your hands up. It's like, oh, nope, no problem. No, it's probably a fucking problem. But it's a difference between being out a 10 count or getting knocked down and being able to get back up on your feet and fight. And so for me, it was this idea that, like, having the situational awareness that, an ambush is coming. I'm going to make myself more resilient and sustain less trauma from that ambush, because I am now have the proper mindset and the proper expectation that I am in a hostile world. There's a reason my gun is condition 1 at the time. There's a reason that I've put my flak jacket and Kevlar on when I went outside this patrol base. It's because there's someone who is actively attempting to hunt and kill me. It's fine because I'm also actively trying to hunt and kill them. And I think I've got the better team of hunter killers. And so it's no problem. And so I think it's this idea that the Stoics called a premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evil. It's the idea that evil exists, it's coming your way. And when you can once you accept that, then it's you stop becoming a victim, you stop merely surviving, and you can start to thrive, I think, in those kind of scenarios.
You kind of glossed over a little bit of the fact that you were blown up as well. And you were awarded a Purple Heart. What happened to you specifically?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of it. The last thing I kind of remember is well, actually, I didn't remember any of it until it was kind of retold to me, and then those files got put back into the bank. Yeah, I had, just some superficial stuff, but I was knocked out unconscious for, I couldn't tell you, a couple minutes, I think, something like that. And when I got back inside the wire, I'm bleeding, head is little not feeling great. And my company commander says, he goes, "What happened?" And I'm like, I don't fucking know. like I could I went to that space and space was blank. The IDC is like, you need to get on that helicopter that's leaving. I'm like, well, no fucking way. And said, okay, well, you need to take 2 weeks off. I said, okay, roger that, doc. And then, next day we went out and we got after it. And, that was November 9th, 2000. Like I said, started off with Rob Kelly. Then, it was just a bad day all around. And what is this, 2021? I just made my first appointment. Well, I just finished my first appointment a couple of weeks ago at the NICO Intrepid Center, which is this TBI clinic in at Walter Reed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a couple issues or whatever, and but always too busy. I went right back to Afghanistan with recon and as a JTAC, and then I go to the School of Infantry and I'm the director there, and then I got a company, and then it's then I'm at grad school and just had a new kid, and so there's now, and I just said, look, you're in your last year teaching here, and if you don't get this shit checked out now, you're never going to get it. And you got the best, clinic in the country 30 minutes away from me in Annapolis here. And so I finally made an appointment, and it was, I think I encourage, everybody to get their stuff checked out. I had, a dozen referrals from that. And one of them was to behavioral health, and I'm just starting that process and finally going to see the wizard. And I think it's been uncomfortable, but I think the verdict is still out. But I can tell you that it's helped me be much more introspective to think about, like, how am I your thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? Like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I acting this way? What am I thinking when I start to kind of, and so I lack that introspection, like, until, the wizard starts to say, like, well, what are you thinking when you're feeling like that? And I'm like, oh, actually, like, or you're thinking this thing, like, how do you start to act when, and I'm like, so, like, I basically, for 10 years have kind of just glossed over some shit that probably needs to be addressed. And so I think it's overall, it's been a very productive experience to kind of go get this thing checked out finally.
Through the prism now of being married and being a parent, and watching your kids grow up, do you wish you had made a choice like that sooner to go get checked out? Because, I mean, when it's just, and you talked before about, the things in combat that you chose to do and people thought you were crazy. And I always kind of harken back to that scene in Saving Private Ryan, where Tom Hanks stands up to get shot at, and Tom Sizemore, his E7, says to him after the fact in the movie, says, if your mother saw you do that, she'd be very upset. Right. Like, you make those kind of decisions now that I think back, would I do those same things again, knowing what else I have with a family and children? I probably would be a little bit more judicious in my decisions, because there's more on the line when there's more in the rear for you, there's more on the line. Right. And it's always one of those things that I think when you view it through that prism, I just wonder if you feel like you could have made different choices. I want to say better choices, but different choices as far as getting checked out and everything else.
Sure. I mean, undoubtedly there's a reason that we have people enlist at 18 to 22, that frontal cortex isn't fully developed. You are much more willing to take a lot of risks. And then you have less collateral damage associated with you. I don't know. Obviously I haven't been in combat since I've had my two kids, and I assume it works into the calculation. How could it not? There's plenty of fathers who have had to make those kind of decisions on the battlefield. So rather than speculate, it'd be probably better just to talk to them. But yeah, when you're talking about, my mom, I tried to do a failed amphibious assault across the Helmand River, and as I was drowning, I was very slow. The Marine Corps does a very good job of indoctrinating you about gear accountability and gear retention. And I was about in 12 feet of water and pushed down to the bottom. And basically I knew I either need to pull the quick release strap on my gear or I'm going to drown. And but then Officer Candidate School comes back in your mind and it says, well, well, then my gear won't be accounted for. And so then you start to debate, quite legitimately debating, is it better to be dead with all my gear accounted for or alive and potentially not have my gear accounted for? And as I started to kind of black out in this little slow scene that was playing out, I thought, my mother is not going to be happy. And that was the only time that one moment was the only time I ever thought about, man, but I think, yes, I should have been checked out sooner. There's always an excuse. And I think it's a little bit of fear, and so I think, I talk all this brave shit that I could do around the battlefield, but then not have the courage to go deal with some hard shit on the home front. And so I think it was a little bit maybe of cowardice, a little bit of fear that I ignored, that there were some clear indications and warnings, some I&W that said you should go get checked out. And I said, no, I'm too busy. And so too busy is a nice excuse, right? But I think it's probably more I lacked the moral courage, and which manifested in not healthy ways. And so I think being more proactive would have been 100% better, because it's all delaying tactic. It's all been a delaying tactic. It's like that shit's not going anywhere. And you got to unpack it at some point. You put it in all those boxes and you put it in that warehouse. And then all of a sudden you get that box, unexpected, return to sender, open up, knock, knock, motherfucker. Mailman's here, got a package for you. It's all the shit you haven't dealt with. And it's like, right. It's like, and you can't say, well, now's not a good time. Could you come back tomorrow? It's like, nope, it's here. It's on the porch and it's opening.
Well, I mean, it's such a tough thing to deal with, because compartmentalizing is key to combat survival. Like, you can't get through it without it. You can't bring your family with you to combat. You can't bring any other issues you have. You need the clearest of clear heads to survive on a routine basis, especially when your life is continually being threatened. And so you put everything in a box and you leave it there, and you're okay with it because you understand that you don't need it to survive in combat. There are very few things you actually need, like mentally, to survive in combat, right? You just need to know that there's a person on the left and your right who's got your back and isn't going to let you die. And after that, it's training and chew gum and kick ass. I mean, it's very simplistic. But as you said, so often we put everything in these compartments, and then we get back, we forget to unpack it, or we don't want to unpack it, or we just pile more shit in there by our next deployment or the next mission or the next assignment, whatever it is. And as you said, eventually either it gets so overflowing with crap that it just spills out, or something generates something to open that compartment and you can't run from it. And unfortunately, we see this all too often, that people's desire to escape what comes out of the compartment results in drinking, drug use, crime, whatever it is, suicide and everything else. And here we are. It was crazy because I saw a statistic the other day that there have been 7,000 soldiers, military members killed since 9/11 and the war on terror. There have been 30,000 suicides in that span of military members. So it's nearly a four times the amount of people who have died by suicide since military members since post 9/11 than have actually been killed in combat, which is unfathomable at this point. It's unfathomable that epidemic is going on and we haven't figured out a way to even remotely reduce it.
Yeah, that was published by Brown University. A student at Boston University worked on it, about a 37-page report. I just finished reading it as well. And, and when I'm listening to the intro of your podcast, it says, combat and survival. And I said, the survival that's been the most challenging for GWAT wasn't on the battlefield. It's been the home front. It's been how to survive the home front. And I had one of my sergeants kill himself 2 weeks ago. I had one of my corporals, Justin McLeod, kill himself last April 2020. And that, you know, we talk about expectations, and when I'm in combat, I know that I'm going to have to write some letters. And when I just put my daughter to bed and I get that phone call and then I've got to, and McLeod was really tough for me. It wasn't the first Marine that I'd lost to suicide, but McLeod was tough for me in that he had come up on his end of service, and right before we deployed, and he said, you know, sir, I was going to extend, but I just had this kid. And I said, well, McLeod, you know, we really could use you, and you're a great shot, and you're a great land nav, and do what's best for your family. And McLeod enlisted, even though he had all these baseball scholarships, because he wanted to go to Iraq. And so he got to go to Iraq, and then he had this kid, and he said, you know, no, I think I got what I needed. I'm going to get out. And I said, man, we're going to be in a bind without you. And he comes back a week later and says, you know, so you're my family too, and I can't leave you guys. You're right. And 2 months later, like I told you about that Marine that one of my Marines handed me his fingers. Well, that's McLeod. And so then I go up to McLeod, and he's flatlining, and I got to talk to this guy who was so excited to coach his son Desmond's little league baseball team and play catch. And this guy who was a star athlete, and now he's missing 2 of his legs and most of his arm. And as he's flatlining in front of me, I'm saying, hey, McLeod, you got to stay with us. You got to stay for Desmond. And everything inside you you feel like you're getting torn apart inside. You just want to cry. But you know that everybody feels that way. And if you do it, you know, and it's not an option for the leader in that moment. And so I'm trying to talk to this guy about his newborn son, and then watching him die. And then I'm able to convey that message, and I see him click, and he starts to fight, and he stays with us, and he stayed with us for 10 years. But he had surgery after surgery, and he's always on the meds, and he eventually loses that battle. And within 2 more months, I had 2 more Marines kill themselves. So I had 3 Marines in a 3-month period in 2020 kill themselves. And I said, that's it. I gotta get involved. And so I studied trauma and moral injuries and from an academic perspective while I was in the graduate program at Georgetown. So I was very familiar with this Jonathan Shea, who wrote this work, Achilles in Vietnam. And if you've ever read Sebastian Junger's Tribe, you know this idea of tribe and purpose and why it's so important. And so I start to read VA suicide report after VA suicide report, and the leading proximal cause of veteran suicide was always feelings of disconnectedness and isolation. And I said, okay. And then there was one other statistic that said that they found no clear correlation between suicide and combat, and that actually more non-combat veterans had killed themselves than combat veterans. And so I started to say, well, what is out there that is putting veterans, period, service members, period, in community and getting them connected and helping them find that tribe and purpose? And what I found is, like, if you're SF, if you're wounded, a lot. And what I found is about 98% of the resources were allocated to about 2% of the population. But that didn't support what the data was saying, that everybody is struggling with this. And actually, the people who are struggling with more are the non-combat veterans. And to me, it makes sense that if you're a Navy sailor enlisted on a submarine and you are in charge for a strategic asset, right? You work in the engineer room of a strategic asset that and you're in close quarters with a crew for months at a time. And then you get out and you say, oh, I was a E4 in the Navy. Do you know, like, not really many people give a shit about that. And there's no foundation out there for you. And I talked to a guy at Glock today and about supporting Patrol Base Abbate, and he had met Sergeant Abate's parents and wanted to call me to talk about it, to see how he could help. And he's like, yeah, well, I usually the stuff we do for raffles are for, I won't say their names, but it's like this foundation. And I said, oh, like, yes, so does everybody else, does the things for those foundations. And I'm glad that we allocated that's where our primary focus was, that we asked the people who do the most, the people who made the most sacrifice, our special forces veterans and our wounded veterans. I think they should be the main effort, but there could be a supporting effort. Why after 20 years have we not started to bring on more organizations that to say, hey, you served and you had this incommunicable experience where everybody to your left and right, you said, I'll die for you. And then you get out and guess what? You will not find that in society. And so I understand that veterans, regardless,
I find the exact opposite in society. It's not I'll die for you. It's I'll cut your legs out from underneath you at the first chance to better myself or advance myself. Like that's, it's not only that it doesn't exist, the polar opposite exists.
Sure. And so I wanted to say, hey, no barrier to entry. Service alone gets you admittance. Everybody else wants you to put you in a box and say, tell us how special you were, tell us how disabled you were, tell us how PTS you are. And I just want to say, hey, you might have those things and that's okay. We're happy to have you on the team, right? But I don't need to put you in a box. I just want to, I know that we all need that tribe. We all need that connection. We all need that community. And I just want to say, if you raise your right hand, come on in. Admin clerk in the Air Force, you're in. Supply soldier, you're in. Marine logistics, you're in. Navy sailor, like surface warfare, you're in. And people keep saying, when we started, people kept saying, well, I was just but I was just right. And we're programmed to condition to feel like unless you were killing bin Laden, your service doesn't matter, right? And so people say, well, I was just I said, no, fuck that. Like, you served, it matters, you're in. Oh, but somebody needs it more than me. Look, dude, lady, there are plenty of good resources out there for people who need in-treatment, inpatient type stuff. Maybe somebody does need it more than you. We're saying that, hey, wherever you're at in the spectrum, we all need community. We all need that purpose. And so we went out, we got 340 acres out in Montana, a ranch, because I think good shit happens outside. And then I said, let's make it free of charge. Let's continue to make it inclusive in that we'll meet you where you're at. You don't have to, this is not the Patrol Base Abbate mountain bike club, right? It's a Patrol Base, whatever. And so we've got fight clubs, bike clubs, strength clubs, book clubs, yoga clubs, art clubs, surf clubs, you name it. We'll be into what you're into. If two veterans are into it, we'll bring you out to Montana. We'll free of cost, and you come out and you do the thing that you're in. So again, get rid of every kind of excuse that you could have. It's free. You rate it. We're doing what you're into, right? And you're going to come out here. You're going to do some work. You're going to rest, refit, and we're going to get you prepared to, because the mission, this is really a mission prep thing that we do out in Montana, because after you spend 4 nights out there in Montana around the fire, getting outside, doing the stuff that you love, the expectation is that you then go back and join your local club. And so we've got over 20 local clubs right now. And those Patrol Base Abbate local clubs, again, no dues, no secret handshakes, no smoky back alley rooms, right? It's like, let's get back to service. And so we partner with local service communities, local service organizations that are already trusted in the community. And so like our Southern California chapter goes out with Recycle for Veterans and goes and cleans up the beaches, because veterans are people of service and you want to feel like you're serving and sacrificing, right? And so we say, we're going to provide you a venue and a space to continue to serve and sacrifice. then there's obviously a social aspect to that, and getting connected locally is sustainable. It's enduring, and it gives you the opportunity to feel like, and to me, as an English guy, I study narratives, right? And this narrative that's formed around veterans that were broken, damaged, disabled, entitled, and I said, no, these are not the veterans that I know. And so not only are we not broken, damaged, disabled, where are the people who are still serving in and out of uniform, and we're in your communities, and we're addressing the greatest needs within our communities, and we're men and women of service, men and women in character. And so let's rewrite that narrative. Let's challenge that narrative that's kind of crystallized about veterans, and we can demonstrate that through our example out there in our local chapters. And I would say the last aspect there is that we have a huge active duty push, because we want to get left at bay. We want to be preemptive on this, and everything else is very react. And so at some point, whether it's 4 years or 40 years, somebody hands you this piece of paper, they say, hey, you're not this thing that you were. And it's like, well, I'm actually still in the uniform. And you're saying, it's like, nope, you're not that thing anymore. And so what we want to do is what the VA suicide reports will tell you is like the most vulnerable period is that first year. And we want to mitigate that risk that that identity crisis that you feel in that first year by having a natural transition that you've already had that battle buddy, that a Marine in a buddy pair, a soldier in a buddy pair is strong, right? A Marine or soldier alone is vulnerable, right? And so what we want to do is get you that buddy pair, get you in that fire team before you end your service. And so, it's to get a lot more proactive, a lot more preemptive in our approach here. And so, whether you're PFC or the general and you're on active duty, we want you on the team. And we're very excited that we've got 3 retreats coming up in July. Book club, fight club, and strength club are all going to be out there in Montana doing that. We just sent last weekend, we sent a crew up Mount Rainier. Our outdoors club just went out and climbed Mount Rainier. In April, we had our hunting club come out and shoot some turkeys. And so, if you raise your right hand, you're in. You're on the team, period.
That's awesome. You lost so many guys out there, sustained so many casualties. What was it about Matthew Abbate that wanted to make you name this after him?
Yeah. I mean, he's the most legendary guy I've ever met. He was the Achilles of our generation of Iraq and Afghanistan. Men wanted to be him, women wanted to be with him. His Navy Cross doesn't even do him, justice. There was a day that he said, sir, they keep ambushing you from your flank, and they're shooting at you from 2 tree lines away. And if I got in that intervening tree line, I could do a lot of work. And I'm like, okay. He's like, but I need to go alone. And I'm like, Abbate, you want to be 500 meters away in between us and the enemy by yourself? I don't know. It sounds pretty sketchy. He's like, sir, just trust me. I got it. And I'm like, all right, dude. He killed 12 guys that day. He had this suppressed Mark 111, I think, and it was the SAS, and you could just hear and I was a pretty aggressive platoon commander, and so I would say, hey, let's go do this, and people would look at me like, how about we don't fucking do that, right? And then I'm like, all right, who's gonna come with? And it'd be like crickets, and Abbate would be like, I'm in, sir. And as soon as Abbate is in, the rest of the hands start to come up. Like, okay, well, if Abbate is here, like, we'll probably be all right. And so even though he was this larger than life figure, he was so humble, and he treated everybody with dignity and respect. From the lowest guy to the top guy, and he's got a son as well, and I just said, hey, we're building. There's 20 million veterans, and then they're all eligible: reserves, National Guard, active duty. They're all eligible to be part of our organization. And so we're building something here pretty special, and it's gonna And I said, we're going to build this epic thing, and who's the most epic legendary guy I know? And I've always felt compelled to continue to honor all the Gold Star legacies, like you point out. I got to tell a couple stories today. Will Donnelly, Robert Kelly, and I could tell many more. But Matt Abbate is he's just the coolest fucking dude, and the greatest warrior I've ever. I fought alongside a lot of badass dudes. Abbate was the lion. He was head and shoulders above us all, and I think what we're building is a pretty special place, and I want to name it after a pretty special guy.
That's awesome. It speaks to an interesting concept that you're including everybody, right? And one of the things you said before that kind of resonated with me, at least from the hazard ground standpoint, is that we hear that a lot from people who we ask to come on the show. Well, I don't have that interesting of a story. Like I didn't do anything. I'm not the American Sniper. I'm not Lone Survivor. But that doesn't minimize anything of what you've done, and it doesn't minimize any importance to the story that you have. And I think one of the great things, and again, I'd hate to, pat my podcast on the back here, but it's everybody's story connects to somebody else. And that's the point of the community, right? You don't know who around you is going to be able to relate to what you went through or your story or your feelings or your emotions. And I think that it's so important that, there is a certain amount of inclusivity in what you're doing with Patrol Base Abbate. That's super important, because every perspective that's brought to the table is just more information, right? It's more knowledge. It's more perspective that people might not be able to see on their own. I think that's really unique about what you've done and super important.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a competition. We ask everybody to check their egos at the door. It's Instagram has kind of created this reality where everybody follows all these soft pages, and they think, if I didn't have dual nods and jump off a little bird helicopter, then I must not be shit. And it's like, look, that is 1% of people. Those are bad motherfuckers. And they rate that our appreciation that they're keeping people up at night, and that someone in the dark corner of the world doing God's work, right? So, of course, we should thank God that such men live and continue to hold such high standards. But again, I think, like you're saying, that each story matters, and it doesn't need to be, well, they did this, and so that it doesn't minimize or marginalize the fact that you decided to serve, and all services should be selfless, and there's sacrifice involved in all service. And I think we're building a large tent, and we're saying, hey, you got a seat at the table, and we want you in. So
where are you with all of your compartments and unpacking them all?
I like the boxes idea. I also kind of say there's a sea bag, and you kind of brought that up, that you kind of keep packing more and more into the sea bag. And to me, it's like the sea bag haunts me. It's always follows me everywhere I go. There's a great scene in I think it's Madhorn, or is it Fields of Fire? I think it's Fields of Fire, where the staff sergeant comes back, and he's hitchhiking out of Camp Pendleton back to see his wife. And this whole hitchhiking scene, he's carrying this sandbag, and the sandbag is obviously this metaphorical kind of thing that he's carrying. And I just listened to Marlantis did the speech this Memorial Day down at the wall, and he sent me his talk down there. And he talks about your ghosts are behind you, but you got to put them out in front of you, and you make them your ancestors. And to get them out in front of you means you need to turn and address them and call them by name. And it's a process, man. And I think writing has really helped make meaning of much of my experiences. And so whether teaching English at the Naval Academy and studying at Georgetown, I think writing has been super helpful for me to make sense of a lot of stuff that I'm working through, and just finally having the courage to to open the box and look in and know it's going to be painful, know it's going to be hurt, but it's also necessary. And so I think it's I don't know, it might be a lifelong project here. Maybe I'm in the early stage, but I've at least started.
Yeah. Are any, existentially, are any of us ever completely, done unpacking our compartments? No, I think there's an argument that as life continues to go on and more things happen and more trauma gets entered into, you deal with things as they come to a certain extent, which prevents you from digging to the bottom of your compartments, as we stay with that analogy. So yeah, I think it is a lifelong process. And I think a lot of people who have been suffering with post-traumatic stress, and they know that it's never complete, right? You're never at a finish line with the whole thing. It's not the flu. Hey, I'm cured, I can go back to normal. It's something that you're going to live with and manage on a routine basis. So, my concern for anybody I talk to with this whole thing is, making sure that there is an understanding that in our desire to help other people, that remember to help ourselves. Like you've talked repeatedly about how much, Patrol Base Abbate means and what it is. And, you're downloading all this information now to students at the Naval Academy, and you're continuing to, gain knowledge through reading and writing and everything else. But what are you doing to make sure that, under the surface, that you're addressing things that are going on in your world? And it's sometimes it never hurts to have somebody just ask that question, because it's as simple as that question can begin the process of opening up a compartment that you hadn't touched before.
Yeah, no, you're spot
on. What do your students know about your military career? Have they ever asked you? Have they ever questioned about your experiences?
The mids are conditioned to hear officers talk about themselves, because I think officers like to talk about themselves. And but officers feel like just because they can, that often that they should, and I would say that that's not the case. And so many of the officers I have encountered on the yard want to start talking about, well, in 1993, and I'm like, man, what's in it for today for these mids? What value you bring in? I got it. I think I brought in, and so the mids always want to hear the background stories. But what I try to, when I talk to the mids, I think I teach literature, right? And so I just find where those combat experiences intersect with the text, and what lessons that we can draw from them, from my experience and from what kind of text is teaching us. And then I just try to really drive home that, maybe you came to the Naval Academy to play lacrosse, and maybe you came to the Naval Academy because you wanted a good engineering degree. Just maybe no one told you, but now I'm reading you the fine print. You're here to fight, win, kill, and if necessary, die. That you are part of this violent persuasion, because war is an extension of politics. And so someone said, hey, we couldn't talk it out, so we need you to go kill the other person and convince them to end, right? And so, and no one is going to have a really passive experience about that. No one's going to say, oh yeah, sure, like, no, that person's going to try to kill you too. And that means you, the surface warfare officer, that means you, the submarine officer, that means you, the naval aviator. Guess what? You are all participants in this violence. And just because we've been lulled over the last, the GWAT, that not a whole lot of ships or submarines, just understand, go back to World War II and understand that's what World War III is going to look like. There's going to be a lot of ships at the bottom of the ocean. There's going to be a lot of planes getting shot out of the sky. And so we are all here as active participants in this violence. And more importantly, you are going to be leading men and women, serving men and women, and you have this sacred oath, you have this sacred duty to do everything you can to prepare that man or woman for that moment. And you have an obligation to start preparing yourself now. That's why you're here. Start preparing yourself. Don't wait 4 years and say, oh, maybe now I'm ensign so maybe. It's like that Marine and that sailor, they're waiting. They're waiting for you to lead them. And you don't know where none of us can predict where we'll be in 6 months, a year. When I checked into my unit, I was going on 31st MU, right? Went to the most kinetic deployment that the Marines fought in Afghanistan. So, and so I think that's the kind of stuff that I try to bring is the gravity of our responsibility, and say we must get to work earnestly because we have this incredible responsibility, this incredible privilege to lead these men and women. So I think that's what I try to do with my experience.
You teach English. Obviously, you're a reader. There's a lot of books out there. Do you have a book that you have read that you would recommend, if there was one or two of them, that most closely relates to the combat experience? Is there one that you can think of that you would recommend to people to read?
Yeah, Matterhorn. I think I'm going to recommend Matterhorn. I think that no one is going to read Matterhorn and be like, damn, that major gave me a shit recommendation, right? Like, I'm confident that you go read Matterhorn, at the end of it, you're going to say, oh, wow, that checks out. So if you want to know what it feels like to be in the bush, if you want to know what it feels like to be in a firefight, if you want it, Carmel Antis Matterhorn is going to take you there. And that's the great thing about literature it's like a lighthouse, and it can shine light in dimly lit areas that you haven't been before. And it says, hey, now this is not a full out, this is not the exact experience, but this is kind of, hey, this is what this looks like. And so none of us have to be flat footed when we encounter something. We can always get a free rep. It's all there. It's all in a book. You just got to open it up and take a look.
Is there anything about your combat experience that maybe keeps you up at night, or you wish you had done differently?
Yeah, I could armchair quarterback myself all day.
How often do you do that?
I try to avoid it at all costs, because every Marine of mine that was killed, I see things that I could have done differently. I wrote, again, I said I do all this stuff through writing. I wrote a post about the sea bag, and I wrote a post about it, and about how some days it feels heavier and some days I can't, no matter where I go, that sea bag is in the same room with me. And I was really not, I didn't write it for this purpose, right? I don't write any of my shit for pity or sympathy. I just write it because I got it right. And then I put it up because maybe someone else might feel the same way or benefit from it. But a couple of my Marines reached out and said, sir, like, no one judges you for those decisions you made. And, so, but I what would I do differently? I didn't know there's a book called Attacks by Rommel. So Rommel, the German Rommel, right? And in my first couple firefights, I was a little bit hesitant to exploit my successes, because the unit we ripped out kind of told us, hey, you can't do this and you can't do that. And if you go there, you'll die. And if you do this, you'll die. And don't do this. And I'm like, well, shit, like, what can you do? And like, and they kind of had built the enemy up to be this 10-foot tall guy. And so there are a couple, I think, really missed opportunities that had I pressed the attack, because the enemy was not used to dealing with a unit that I think was as aggressive as we were. And I think that there were openings, and I said, oh, we were pretty successful today. Let's just consolidate here. And I think that we had some opportunities to really fucking crush them. But I was a little bit nervous of my own successes, or my platoon successes, I should say. So I would read attacks before I went to combat, and try to model some of what Rommel talks about in that book. And then I would be more familiar with awards. I think I didn't have very strong company leadership, and I think I had a senior staff NCO in the company telling me, you can't you can't write any more awards for your people. And, you know, these freaking Marines were running through minefields and charging machine guns and doing crazy heroic shit on a daily basis. And then I get this admin first sergeant telling me that, you know, you can't write any more awards because you've exceeded the make-believe quota or whatever. And so I feel like I wish there's no excuses, right? It's not OJT, you know, when you're an officer, it's you lead and be prepared to lead, and both administratively, tactically, technically. And so I think I could have, I wish I would have had a little bit more administrative savvy and a little bit more moral fortitude to kind of say no, like. And so I know, and those are real moral injuries. Like, I know guys, you know, awards are such a controversial subject, and some people say, oh, you're just doing your job. Some people will say, oh, like, and, you know, it becomes this pissing contest. It's always a shifting goalpost. It's always somebody has this hierarchy. It's a horrible, negative, cynical subject to touch. But I'll tell you that read any Vietnam book, and it's in the first 100 pages, it's going to talk about medals 5 times. And from my experience, the thing that still hurts guys on the inside is a medal, and or lack thereof, or didn't get the right medal. And so I think I would have those would, starting there, and we could probably spend all night talking about the things I maybe should have fucking done better. But I think overall, what I learned about myself is I can effectively shoot, move, communicate under fire. So like that's I think I fit the bill, you know. But I think of course there's a couple, and more than anything, it's those ones that are finite, like you're not getting that person back. And so of course there's a couple things that I wish I'd done better on those days.
How does your military career end? Do you know what the ending looks like? Do you want to stay for 20? Are you on the back 9 at this thing? I mean, what are your next moves?
I head to the Naval War College to go to command and staff next up in Newport. I'm headed there this summer. You know, never in my wildest dreams could I imagine that the Marine Corps was going to send me to 3 different universities to get 2 different master's degrees like they have. But I've been very fortunate after spending 10 years driving hard and fast in the infantry to have, you know, 4 years here in the middle of my career to kind of think and learn. And the Marines are paying me to use my brain. They're always paying you to use your brain, but I think I would like to be a battalion commander, and so that would put me, you know, at 20, and I don't have any ambitions beyond battalion command. So I think it would be great to have 1,200 men leading an infantry battalion, and I think I would be very content retiring after that. But you know, who knows?
The Marines say to you, Tom, we need you to deploy again. Do you have any hesitation whatsoever?
In a fucking heartbeat, man. Yeah, that's my shit. I mean, the junior Marines, being with the junior Marines, I mean, that is what sustains me. That is my lifeblood. That's what fills my cup. It's why it keeps me in the seat. It's what keeps me in my uniform. And then, you know, I think war is a racket, but I do love fighting. And so if you said, I would say, hey, I recommend you don't do the war. Oh, you don't give a shit what the major has to say? Yeah, no shit. All right. Okay, so the war is still going. All right, send me to it, right? I'm happy to go fight it because I do very much enjoy the heat of the battle. So yeah, I'd put me on the first plane.
Yeah. You know, there's a couple of screws loose with that statement, right? You know, you probably, when you go into the doctor, make sure you mention that part to them, see what their response is. I'm not a qualified clinician or anything, but you know.
Sure.
A couple of screws loose still.
No doubt about it. Yes.
It's funny. I mean, look, I said the same thing to my wife. Like, I would love to take a brigade overseas, right? Like, I would love to go deploy as a brigade commander. And she looked at me like I was crazy. You're going to leave the kids? You're just going to go? I'm like, yeah, I mean, because it's kind of what the life that we've chosen, right? Like it comes with it. I'm not putting it over my family and my kids, but this is part of the whole operation, I wouldn't, I'm not like out there actively looking for one, but if I was in the spot and they said you're going, I wouldn't even hesitate. It's just part of the deal.
Yes, sir.
So, well, look, I appreciate your honesty, man. There's a lot that we began to unpack there, and all of your story, I think, resonates with a big part of our audience. So, thank you for sharing some very tough details with us. I can't imagine it's fun ripping that Band-Aid off. I hope there's some catharsis in it for you. I hope that every time you tell it gets a little bit easier. Not that it's going to ever make it okay, or it's ever going to make it something that is the pill less bitter. But I think we found a lot of times in talking to people that especially when it's somebody who relates to it, that there's a shared understanding and empathy that we all can rally around, so to speak. So I do appreciate you being so honest with all those things. But that said, I'm also wishing you for the best of your physical and mental health going forward. I mean, obviously the injuries you sustain will have some sort of effect on you. Let's just hope we can get all those things worked out. Right. And part of, I think your courage in doing it, even if it is 10 years later, is knowing that there is a roll of the dice, that they may tell you, look, you're unfit for duty. Right. And that's the scariest thing about this whole thing. For people who have chosen this as a more than a career, it's a passion. It's as you said, it's what fills your cup. To have that taken away from you for something that's completely out of your control is a dangerous and scary place, because then when you take that uniform off, it's like, what's left of Tom? You have to reinvent Tom all over again. And it goes to what you spoke about with suicide. All of a sudden now I'm something different. I'm something I wasn't before, and I don't have that connectivity. So, not to preach to you or anything, but that I'm sure you understand the importance of that mental health and understanding where you are with all that.
Yes, sir.
You're making me very nervous when you call me sir. It's okay. This is a rank-free podcast, trust me. So, well, look, I wish you nothing but the best to you and your family. Best of luck to you with and continued success with Patrol Base Abbate. And for those who are interested, it's PBABBATE, phonetically Papa Bravo Alpha, Bravo Bravo Alpha Tango Echo.org. PBAbbate.org is the place you can go. You guys can donate, you can check out, and you can, right there on the website, you can just fill out an option to be part of the whole thing, right? It's that simple?
That simple.
Okay. Well, again, good luck with the rest of the teaching. Thank you so much for telling us your story, Tom. We certainly appreciate it. And as always, man, thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thanks for having me. Semper Fi.
That'll do it for this week's episode. We certainly appreciate you joining us. Make sure you guys follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground and Hazard Ground Podcast. Make sure you're following Killcliff as well at Killcliff. Check out their YouTube page as well. You can get all of our podcasts there. Don't forget about our website at hazardground.com and our Amazon promotion, of course. And as always, we'll talk to you guys next week.
You've been listening to Killcliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.